The day trucks started dumping trash into the old quarry, Ethan Walker knew something wasn't right. But he never imagined that decision would cost the HOA millions, and by the end of this story, the entire board would be forced to resign. Ethan's property sat just outside the quiet town of Ridgewood. Years earlier, he had purchased the land because of the massive abandoned stone quarry on it. Most people saw a deep empty pit surrounded by rocky walls. Ethan saw potential. He planned to turn the quarry into a peaceful lakefront property someday, maybe even build cabins overlooking the water. But Ridgewood had recently grown fast, and the nearby HOA community was struggling with waste management issues during a construction boom. One afternoon, Ethan heard the rumble of trucks approaching the quarry entrance road. When he walked outside, he watched something strange unfold. A large dump truck rolled down the dirt path leading to the quarry. Then another. And another. Within minutes, construction debris began pouring into the giant pit: broken wood, drywall, packaging materials. Ethan stood there stunned. No one had asked his permission. Across the hill, the HOA neighborhood looked peaceful, as if nothing unusual was happening. But Ethan knew exactly what this meant. Someone had decided his land was the perfect dumping ground, and the moment he discovered who approved it, everything would change, because the board members believed the quarry was abandoned. What they didn't realize was that Ethan Walker owned every inch of it, and he had just started documenting everything. At first, Ethan assumed it had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe the construction company believed the land belonged to the HOA, but the trucks kept coming. Day after day, more debris poured into the quarry. Soon the once empty stone basin started filling with piles of wood scraps, insulation, broken pallets, and discarded materials. Ethan drove up to the Ridgewood HOA office hoping to clear things up quickly. Inside, the board members listened politely as he explained that the quarry belonged to him. One of them glanced at a map and shrugged. "Our records show that area is unused land beside the neighborhood," the board president said. Ethan calmly placed a document on the table. It was the official property deed. The room grew quiet, but instead of stopping the dumping immediately, the board members exchanged uncertain looks. "Well," one member said carefully, "construction is already underway. Moving everything now would be complicated." Ethan couldn't believe what he was hearing. They were asking him to simply accept that his property had become a landfill. He left the meeting frustrated but composed. Because Ethan wasn't just a landowner, he was a former environmental consultant who understood exactly what illegal dumping meant. That evening he walked back to the quarry and began taking photographs: truck license plates, company logos, load after load of debris entering his property. If the HOA thought they could quietly use his land without permission, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson, and Ethan had already started building the case. Within a week, the quarry looked completely different. The once empty stone pit had begun filling with massive piles of construction waste. Workers barely noticed Ethan standing nearby with his camera. They assumed he was just another curious local watching the activity, but Ethan was carefully recording everything: every truck that arrived, every company delivering debris, every timestamp. Late one afternoon, he noticed something particularly interesting. One of the trucks carried the logo of a major construction contractor working inside the HOA development. Ethan approached the driver politely. "Who told you to dump here?" he asked. The driver answered casually, "The Ridgewood HOA board approved it. Said this quarry was their temporary disposal site." That single sentence confirmed everything Ethan needed to know. The HOA hadn't made a mistake. They had made a decision, and they had done it without checking the ownership of the land. That evening, Ethan contacted an environmental law firm. When the attorney reviewed the photos, his reaction was immediate. "This isn't just trespassing," he said. "This could qualify as unauthorized commercial dumping." The potential consequences were enormous. Cleanup costs alone could reach millions of dollars. But Ethan wasn't interested in revenge. He simply wanted the situation corrected. So the attorney sent the HOA a formal notice requesting immediate removal of all dumped materials. The board's response arrived 3 days later, and it made the situation far worse, because instead of apologizing, they refused. The HOA board believed they had the advantage. Their response letter claimed the quarry had appeared abandoned and unused for years. Removing the debris now, they argued, would be financially unreasonable. Ethan read the letter twice, then he smiled quietly. Because their response revealed something important, the board still didn't understand the seriousness of the situation. His attorney immediately filed a legal claim for property damage and environmental violation. When inspectors visited the quarry site, they quickly realized the scale of the problem. Dozens of truckloads of construction debris had been dumped without authorization. Some materials required specialized cleanup procedures. The estimated restoration cost climbed higher with every inspection report. Soon the number reached an amount that shocked even the HOA's lawyers, several $1,000,000. Word began spreading through the Ridgewood community. Residents who had trusted the board to manage neighborhood decisions started asking uncomfortable questions. Why had the quarry been used without verifying ownership? Why had the board ignored the legal notice? Meanwhile, Ethan remained patient. He wasn't angry. He simply allowed the legal process to move forward, because every day the evidence grew stronger, and eventually the HOA's insurance company became involved. When they reviewed the case, their response was immediate. Settlement negotiations would begin, but the amount being discussed was far larger than the board ever expected. By the time negotiations began, the situation had become impossible for the HOA to ignore. Environmental cleanup estimates alone were reaching staggering levels. Truckloads of debris would need to be removed. The quarry would require soil testing, restoration, and professional remediation. The HOA's insurance provider reviewed the evidence carefully, then they made a recommendation: settle the case immediately. Because if the dispute went to court, the final cost could grow even higher. During the first negotiation meeting, the board members looked noticeably nervous. Ethan arrived calmly with his attorney and a folder containing weeks of documentation, photographs, inspection reports, official property records. The insurance representative finally spoke. We're prepared to resolve this matter with a financial settlement. After several hours of discussion, the number was finalized: $7 million. The room fell silent when the figure was announced. For the HOA board, it was a devastating realization. Their decision to treat the quarry as unused land had triggered one of the most expensive mistakes in the neighborhood's history. Ethan agreed to the settlement on one condition: the cleanup would be completed properly under professional supervision. The insurance company accepted, but the story didn't end with the payment, because the residents of Ridgewood had been watching the entire situation unfold, and they were about to hold the board accountable for the decision that caused it. News of the $7 million settlement spread quickly through the Ridgewood community. Residents gathered at the next HOA meeting with questions that could no longer be ignored. How had the board approved dumping on land they didn't own? Why hadn't they stopped the trucks after receiving the legal notice? The board members struggled to answer. Some attempted to explain that they believed the quarry was abandoned. Others admitted they hadn't verified the property records before approving the dumping site. For many homeowners, that explanation wasn't enough. The settlement had been paid through the HOA's insurance policy, but it still meant rising premiums and serious damage to the community's reputation. One resident stood up and spoke clearly: leadership requires responsibility. That statement changed the tone of the meeting instantly. Within days, several board members submitted resignation letters. Soon the entire board stepped down. A new group of residents volunteered to rebuild trust and manage the HOA more carefully. Meanwhile, cleanup crews began removing the debris from Ethan's quarry exactly as agreed. Truck after truck carried the waste away until the massive stone pit slowly returned to its original state. For Ethan, the goal had never been the money. He simply wanted his property respected, but the lesson Ridgewood learned would last far longer than the cleanup process. Because the quiet quarry outside town had become a powerful reminder of something important: never assume land belongs to no one. Months later, the quarry looked peaceful again. The piles of debris were gone, replaced by clean stone walls and quiet open space. Ethan stood near the edge of the pit one evening, watching sunlight reflect off the rock surface. For the first time since the trucks arrived, the land finally felt like his again. The settlement funds allowed him to move forward with his original dream. Plans were already underway to transform the quarry into a beautiful private lake surrounded by trees and walking paths. Meanwhile, the Ridgewood community had changed as well. The new HOA board operated very differently. Every decision now required careful review and clear communication with residents. Because everyone remembered what happened when assumptions replaced responsibility, what began as a simple attempt to solve a construction problem had turned into a lesson worth millions, and the quiet quarry that once looked like abandoned land became the reason an entire HOA leadership had to step down. Sometimes the biggest consequences begin with the smallest decision, and sometimes protecting your property simply means standing firm and letting the truth unfold. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.